Chris here with a brief devotional thought for the day. Here's the question: who are you trusting in? What are you trusting in? 2 Chronicles chapters 14 through 16 give us a glimpse into the leadership of a guy named King Asa, and why staying the course over the long haul is absolutely critical. Asa's leadership began on a really solid note. Chapter 14, verse number 2 describes him like this: Asa was a good king. He did things right in God's eyes. It goes on to describe religious reforms, infrastructure projects, military success, on and on. But chapter 16, it gives us a glimpse into the later leadership years of his life and why we can never afford to coast or become complacent. At this point, Asa had been leading for about 36 years, more than 3 decades. He's got experience under his belt. And experience can do one of two things. First of all, experience can make you more dependent, reliant upon God. When you walk in humility and trust, realizing that every good thing that has happened to me has been a result of God's extravagant love, kindness, and grace. That's one thing experience can do. Number 2, on the other hand, experience can also make you more self-reliant and dependent. When you choose to buy into the idea that it was my intellect, wisdom, savvy, know-how, intuition, education, giftedness, hard work, diligence, you name it, that got me to this moment. Asa opts for option number 2. A neighboring kingdom begins an aggressive military campaign against his kingdom. Early on, he would have sought God's help. Instead, he takes matters into his own hands, and his plan works, initially at least. The charts start going back up and to the right again, but God's heart is broken. So God sends a prophet by the name of Hananiah to this leader that he so deeply loves, and this is the incredible message God gives that prophet to share with Asa. Verse 9 of chapter 16, God is always on the alert, constantly on the lookout for people who are totally committed to Him. You were foolish to go for human help when you could have had God's help. How do you think Asa responded? Well, he blows a gasket. The dude totally loses it. He puts the prophet who had shared the message with him in prison. He even vents his anger on some of his own people. He begins to oppress them. It's called displaced aggression. Who was Asa angry at? I think he was probably angry at himself. And I think he was also angry at God, because God didn't get with his program. Sadly, Asa would carry that anger for the rest of his life, the next 5 years. So my question is this: who are you trusting in? What are you trusting in? 3 thoughts from this story. Number 1, humility and trust are lifelong postures that constantly need to be developed and put into action, regardless of how long we've been following Jesus, how long we've been living, loving, and leading. We'll never reach a point where we are not absolutely desperate and dependent upon God. 2 passages from the epistles of John have lit me up lately. The first is from 1 John chapter 5, verse number 21, where God says this: "Dear children, keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts." We always need to be attentive that there are things vying for our affection and our attention, and we need to keep our hearts devoted to God. Asa's devotion drifted. The second verse that's been lighting me up is the next book, 2 John. There's only 1 chapter. It's verse number 8. "Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked so hard to achieve. Be diligent so that you'll receive your full reward." 36 years in, Asa dropped his guard. He lost his diligence. He allowed his devotion to fade. And what should have ended with a bang faded with a whimper. Let's make certain that we do not lose what we've worked so hard to achieve. Here's thought number 2. Frustration and anger are warning lights that something internally is off. Asa became angry. Richard Rohr once astutely wrote, most people do not see things as they are. Rather, they see things as they are. What could your frustration and anger be telling you about you? Are you carrying around an underlying sense of frustration and anger? Lashing out, maybe taking your frustration out on the door, the dog, your children, your spouse, whatever or whoever happens to be convenient. Why not pause and ask yourself, why am I angry? 3. God's grace is always greater than our mistakes. He's ready to help. I want to go back to verse 9 of 2 Chronicles chapter 16. God is always on the alert, constantly on the lookout for people who are totally committed to Him. You were foolish to go for human help when you could have had God's help. Now, instead of hearing that as a rebuke, what if Asa had heard that as an invitation from a loving God, saying, Asa, why? Why are you trusting in people when I've always been here for you? Put your faith in me. What would have happened had Asa turned to God instead of simply sulking in anger for the next 5 years? We'll never know. So my question, who are you trusting in? What are you trusting in? Remember, humility and trust, we'll always need them. We constantly need to develop them. Secondly, frustration and anger, if they're present, let's ask why. And third, God's grace is always greater than our mistakes. The fact that He says, I'm always looking, you should have turned to me, was an invitation. Turn to me. Right now, I'm looking at you. God bless. Have a great day. Hope this devotional word has encouraged you.